Hello, everyone, and good whatever moment of this day you are enjoying on your time zones, whether you are watching us or listening to us live now, or you enjoy the recording later on. And also, a wholehearted thank you for your patience with us starting the conversation with a couple of minutes delay. And life happens to the best of us, and sometimes we need a bit of patience and grace. But we are here now, and we are so happy and privileged to welcome you to another conversation of our April the Inclusive Workplace series. And today we are here to talk about neurodiversity, and we are here to talk about harnessing the power of neurodiversity in our workplaces. I already see comments coming in, so thank you so very much for letting us know that everything is up and running. And please do continue to drop us small notes. Let us know at least where you're connecting from, and this way we will be also traveling around the world through your locations. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co-host for the next hour or so. I'm a journalist by trade, I'm a change practitioner by choice, and an absolute hacking HR supporter by calling. And I have the great honor of having Jessa taking care of us backstage. And I will ask her to help me bring some of the most amazing people you will meet in our hacking HR community. And here they are, and they look so wonderful next to one another and ready to go. Now, we will be discussing neurodiversity. I will just encourage everybody in the audience to use the chat generously and consider this conversation as much yours as it is our panelists. Drop your stories about neurodiversity, drop your ideas, drop questions. We will be definitely keeping an eye on the chat, and we will make you as much part of the conversation as we can. Now, let's make the most out of a very short hour ahead and talk about neurodiversity. What I will do, you are all friends and veteran panelists of Hacking HR, so you know the drill. I will pass the e-mic around clockwise as you appear on my screen, and I will ask you to firstly shortly introduce yourselves, and also for the sake of outlining our conversation space today, what is your definition and understanding of neurodiversity? And I will also have one very, very small logistics ask from all the panelists. When you are not actively contributing, could you just please stay on mute, because that will keep us safe from background noise and echo. And I will let the cat out of the bag. That's also my secret tell that you want to jump into the conversation. Cassandra, it's so good to see you. It's been quite a while since we shared the same screen. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Manola. I think it was around this time last year. I'm Cassandra Lammers. I lead Total Rewards at the New York Times Company, and I am a passionate person about neurodiversity as a mom of two neurodivergent teenagers. And I think about neurodivergence as a superpower, really, and as something that, everyone is wired uniquely. And it's just a way of thinking and being that's perhaps not typical, and that we all need to kind of rethink ourselves about how to support that. And so that's why I'm here.
Thank you so very much. And I realized that we have two Cassandras on the panel today.
How
So
cool
can
is
you
that?
help me out with an alternative to the full Cassandra that you, or Cassandra L and Cassandra R?
I go by CR in professional circles, so
CR.
I'm very happy to go by CR.
Perfect. So we will have Cassandra, and that will be Cassandra Lammers, and then we will have CR when we get to Cassandra Rose. But in the meantime, I will just say welcome to Brian. Good to see you again, Brian.
Very good to see you, Manola. Brian Fitzpatrick, I'm the principal of Sediema Consulting. My definition of neurodiversity, very simply, is differently abled. It's always been under the umbrella of diversity. What's very encouraging is that just feels like in recent years or even months, it's getting more exposure. So it's great that we have thought leaders here to talk about it. I think there's something for all of us to pick up. I'd be shocked if any one of us were more than a degree from someone in our lives that fell under this definitional category. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Now, before I will ask CR to introduce herself and her definition of neurodiversity, I just want to take a few seconds and really, really give her a wholehearted round of applause. She moderated an incredible conversation yesterday on building psychologically safe workplaces. And just go and listen to the conversation. Wonderful insights and also amazing facilitation work. So CR, so good to see you today as a panelist.
Yes, my pleasure. I actually love this seat because it's less work. Manola, thank you for always herding the cats, as I like to say. We have so many ideas and we're so passionate about the topics we speak on. So you do such an amazing job of getting actionable things out. So thank you. I did it once and I give the power right back over to you again. So hello, everyone. My name is Cassandra Rose. I am so fortunate to be here with another Cassandra and amongst this amazing panel of friends. For me, I am an HR executive. I have 20 years of experience in the space, 10 years of those being the benefits space. So I'm accustomed to supporting individuals in the workplace when it comes to workplace accommodations. And for me, the definition of neurodivergent is truly the ability to understand that we are all human in the same way that we're the same yet different, from our fingerprints to our points of view, is the same way that our bodies can be different and allow us to think about things differently, right? I love what Brian said about being differently abled. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to work against something. The system has to now open itself up to be able to support people who bring creative, innovative ideas in ways that we are not yet accustomed to. And so that's what I would challenge everyone to think of neurodivergence as.
Thank you so very much, CR. Alisa, good to see you again. It's been too long.
You're so sweet. Thank you, Manola. And thank you all for including me today. I come at this topic, as most of my topics that I speak about, from a brain science and also from a teacher's perspective. I've got a husband who's a 5th grade teacher, bilingual school to boot. And I also have a son who's a guidance counselor. So we have a lot of these conversations, and neurodivergence is typically associated with somebody who is either on a spectrum, autistic type of spectrum, or has a learning developmental issue that's been diagnosed, right? And I say diagnosed, maybe as an adult, they still haven't had it, but there is a name. We have these big books in our house, the DSM and other psychological books and teaching things, and there's a name for that particular developmental challenge or learning challenge. But I also work in the diversity space. And so one of the things that I'm very, it's a controversial issue, and I think some of you have already said this, is that even if it's not given a clinical name, we do learn, we take in information, we contribute it back in different ways. Some of us may be visual learners, some of us may be, like I have a lot of people who say people go to a meeting and they have to have time to process what was there, so they don't say a lot in the meeting, right? And I think there's a really good space here to kind of pull apart what do we consider neurodivergent, and that divergent word kind of bothers me in this phrase, because I do agree with the other introductions that I think everyone has a different way of taking information and using it. And so how do we cultivate that in a way that we all can bring our best to work and to the world?
Thank you so very much, Alisa. And Sandy, it's such a pleasure having you in this conversation with us. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Nice to see you again, Manola, and everybody else that's on the panel. And Alyssa, nice to share the panels with you again. So my name is Sandy. I've been doing HR for close to 23 years, 24 years, something like that. And this topic to me is important because I have a little one that is, neurodivergent. and I am myself neurodivergent, so, and so is my husband. So this is a very, a topic that's very near and dear to my heart in that sense. And to me, I mean, it's just the uniqueness, and I love the way that Cassandra had worded it earlier. It's just the differences, the uniqueness, and just that special touch of what we were talking about earlier, that superpower, that fairy dust, I think just it's a superpower that.
Thank you all so very much, and please, everybody in the audience, if you feel comfortable, just drop your own definition of neurodiversity, or any kind of experiences you had with understanding neurodiversity, as it showed up in your life or in your work. Now, I would love to take a few minutes and really look at how neurodiversity shows up in the workplace. And for some reason, I opened diagonally. So CR, I will ask you to be the pioneer on this one. And then everybody, unmuting competition open, and you build your own conversation. So CR, please.
Yeah, I'll actually take it from an HR and legal standpoint. So when I think about the ADA, right, which was passed in the early 90s, I think it was 1991. I feel like that was the bedrock of organizations must, at a minimum, protect employees in certain ways. And that's, what can we do to make sure that there's an accommodation that's not too harsh on the business? It won't cause you an undue expense, but you can put in place to make sure that someone who needs something, whether it's a ramp for a wheelchair or something like that, that seems obvious when we talk about it now, but literally there were activists who had to get this passed at a congressional level to add those accommodations, right? And when we think about universal design, about creating something that the system shapes, I'm not negatively impacted by having a ramp. If anything, I prefer the ramp over the stairs sometimes when I'm entering a building, right? We don't think about it anymore. And so to me, I'm so happy the topic of neurodivergence comes into place, because now to me, that's the next phase, right? We're trying to solve for how can we support people who may have visible challenges in the world, right? And solve for that. But neurodivergence, that takes place in the mind. And so what are some tools, resources, and how can we not just compel and oblige, but encourage and support people in the workplace as they're working? What is it that you need? And there are some workplace accommodations, some companies that put in where they have a third party vendor who can support you. I mean, we think about even during the pandemic, the great pause, where we were at home and our backs were hurting, right? Like I was staring at a screen forever. All of a sudden I was like, oh, we need ergonomic design. But what if someone just needs that in general in their lives? Do they have to create a burden of proof to show that? And I think in the workplace, it's super important to think through these things before it happens, before it's that one lone person who feels like they have to be different. They have to identify the thing that makes them so different from the others. And then it creates in them an anxiety of, will this impact the way that people perceive me? Will I not be promoted because of these things that are needed? But if we're building it as part of our process, then guess what? They're supported. They don't necessarily have to point to it as a deficit. They can point to it like, I'm appreciated and I belong.
CR, that is spot on. I mean, I think the stigma around self-identifying and putting it out there has been a real barrier for neurodivergent individuals. I was reading just the other day that 1 in 5, 20% of adults in the workforce identify as neurodivergent. And that is a huge number of people who are more often than not disclosing that they are neurodivergent, not seeking accommodation in the workplace, and therefore probably not bringing their best selves to work. So, that's a huge barrier for them in terms of what they are able to contribute and really being able to do their best work every day. So, thinking about it from that perspective, it's a real hindrance to them to be able to be their best self, to produce their best work, to really be who they are and their most authentic in the workplace and be comfortable and authentic. And, you know, when you think about other things, to your point, more visible disabilities or more visible or notable identities, it is much more accepted. And so I'd say, you know, this is something that is becoming more accepted and understood as an identity in the workplace, but it's still got a long way to go as an identity that is a contributing identity as part of the workplace.
Thank you. Where shall we go next? Alice, Brian. We go Brian
Yeah.
and then Lisa.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, from a business standpoint, this is about tapping into a skill set that's out there that oftentimes is not fully leveraged. Very often, neurodivergent candidates, not only will they be above average from a talent and skill standpoint, but especially in areas like memory, math, logic, pattern recognition. And there are functional areas that could use that help. We hear a lot about the skills shortage in the economy, but those that are neurodivergent tend to have very high either unemployment or underemployment rates. And so, yes, there are accommodations that could and should be looked at. And then there are some very simple, I think, fixes or tweaks either to a physical office environment or even in a virtual setting that makes for a more inclusive set of meetings and in general allows individuals to participate at a level and at a speed that is most comfortable to them.
Lisa.
Thank you. I absolutely agree. In fact, Manola, please don't take this the wrong way, but one of the things that is becoming de facto, and it's not for you personally, but it's just captions, right? Like we should be turning on captions in every virtual meeting. We should be assuming for once that somebody in the room, physical or virtual, is neurodivergent and not make them turn on the camera if they don't want to, right? Don't assume that they're going to contribute, like I said earlier, in that meeting at that time, but later may say something in an email or otherwise that says, you know, I've been thinking about what we said in the meeting, blah, 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 right? Those things should become de facto okay in every meeting, in every kind of situation. And you know, one of the things that, because I lead the ERG Leadership Alliance, ERG, for those of you who don't know, the abbreviations Employee Resource Group, with the neurodivergent ERGs, they get caught in this very unfortunate dilemma where we tend to measure people's participation and engagement in visual, quantitative ways. And oftentimes in a neurodivergent ERG, they're not showing up at events, but they may be downloading anonymously information that's shared. It's not very measurable, but has high impact. So I think we really need to shift first the way we look at, we should just provide that accessibility, like CR, your ramps. Like today, if there was a building without a ramp, you'd be like, hey, where's your ramp, right? Like, hey, where are captions? Like we should be doing that as norm, those kinds of things. And also just, I guess, being giving each other the benefit of the doubt that, you know what, the older I get, I like having captions. It almost isn't even a neurodivergent thing. It's just there are things that make life easier to participate, and not all of it is. It has to be kind of full throttle on the camera and subsequently contributing in meetings.
And thank you so very much for the call out. It's much appreciated. Thank you, Sandy.
So to me, I would say how it shows up. You know, I think it's one, it's us sharing our story. One, us actually openly saying, hey, by the way, I have this struggle. So since I started working at the company that I work at, um, my son was just recently diagnosed. And so when I started working here, people, we had more individuals that actually had perhaps attendance issues, right? But it's not so much because it's them taking care of themselves, it's them taking care of the doctor's appointments, or maybe perhaps realistically, and I am one that has those, and now I kind of learned to accept them, the rough mornings. Sometimes the kiddo cooperates. Sometimes he doesn't want to cooperate, right? Transitions can be difficult. So us understanding kind of, okay, this morning kind of, they were kind of a little bit different. So let's respect that. Let's give them that space, right? And just kind of let them flow, just allowing that space, that transparency of, hey, you know what, I'm dealing with that myself, and so just talking to your employees when you're seeing those patterns, the attendance issues, or that they're leaving early all the time, or that they're coming in late. It might not be that they're requesting the full day, but they're coming in late, or they're leaving early, and you're kind of like, again, twice in a week. I mean, yeah, that happens sometimes, twice in a week. Sometimes it's the whole week, and I've been I've been right there. There's times that when I show up to the office, I am literally on 2 to 3 hours of sleep that night. Why? Because it was a rough night. And I just kind of, from the beginning, when people approach me, I'll say, you know what, it was a rough morning. So if I don't give you my full blown attention, understand that I'm listening, but I need, it's going to take me a little bit longer to process. So I think it's just us also sharing our experience and allowing that space and asking the questions. So like I mentioned, with me working here, I've learned more and more that there's more parents here that do have a child that's on the spectrum, or perhaps have two children on the spectrum, right? Or more children on the spectrum. And some of them do have the attendance issues, and some of them we've never even taken the time to address and say, hey, what's going on? And so actually today, I'm having one of those conversations where this employee has been working for us for, I want to say, 17 years. And we have never taken the time to really address that issue. So of course, I'm going to sit down with them and, do the accommodation portion of it. And to allow for them to be able to not necessarily come and go as they please, but to give them that space to be able to be the caregiver, the caretaker for their child at home that needs it.
Thank you. And something that we gently touched on during this round of answers, and that is the incredible value that neurodiversity not only brings into the workplace, but also builds and nurtures. And Brian, you started mentioning something in your previous answer. So I would ask you to lead us into this one. What is this value that neurodiversity brings and then nurtures inside the organization? And there are extra points if we can also share some stories that really shaped your understanding about this value.
Yeah. So stories, but then also extra value, extra credit for those that have been exposed to some of the recent studies that are appearing in publications. The last two conferences that I was at had special tracks around neurodivergence in the workplace. So I think we're increasingly moving from the purely anecdotal to research based, which is great because that will speak to those cases where unfortunately you're working with an executive or a team that needs to understand somehow what the connection is with the business case. But we know traditionally, right? Diverse and inclusive teams are more impactful. They're more productive. They're more innovative. They imbue a special level of camaraderie to inclusive cultures, and organizations that don't keep track of a talent pipeline that includes neurodivergent candidates are missing out at that at their own risk. I think in many cases it's the recruiting and selection, and then later on career development sort of trifecta of areas that because companies in the HR function tend to look at their processes as monoliths, and it has to be scaled and done at high volume. You do that, though, at the risk of not stopping for a second and looking at individuals with the talents that they have. And so there's a whole set of literature on moving away, in fact, as far as opening the door right at the beginning of a potential employee journey. But moving away from the so-called traditional interview process, moving to formats that are more game-based, and including accommodations. It's been said that the best accommodations are the ones that an individual doesn't even have to ask for. We talked about captions a moment ago. I mean, that's low cost. And so it's an organizational culture, and often that comes from the senior executive team. But these topics have to be in the body of knowledge, not only with the HR team, but with managers in general, so that they're aware and they can lean into these very accessible technologies.
Thank you, Brian. CR.
Yeah, well, I can share a story about how the benefits team can help redesign some of that onboarding and even interview processing. So I've had candidates say, hey, I want to speak to the benefits person. They're asking me, is there a certain prescription that we cover, right? Because as you're moving from one employer to another, your costs may go up exponentially, and they don't know how to express that to the hiring manager. They don't know how to express that to the recruiter. And this brave soul was, bold enough to do so. And I was like, hey, now that I know that exists, why aren't we giving that information? Let's put that on our career site. This is the type of benefits we have. These are the carriers that we have, right? So they can do their own research. And if they have a specific question, loop me into that interview process. Make sure you're designing your candidate process in a HIPAA compliant way that people can get these resources without necessarily having to disclose. One thing that I've loved, that I've noticed over the last 5 years or so from a DEI perspective, has been the redesign of career pages. Reflects people that you want to attract. I think there's a fine line between representing something that's untrue about your workplace, but also being aspirational in those representations, right? So as much as possible, represent diversity in every way. And it may be an employee story who's willing to share that they have ADHD perhaps. And, working here has been a great way of them being still a productive member of society. In your candidate pools, just saying, hey, if you don't meet all these things, or if you are from a marginalized community, list some of those out, including, but not, limited to, people who are neurodivergent, people who may be LGBTQIA, people who, right? When I see my identity listed, it's like, oh, they are talking to me. So back to Brian's point, these are relatively low or no cost options of resources you already have that you can say, here's an invitation. We expect people like you to arrive because you're part of humanity, and we want the best of humanity coming here to work for us. We're seeking you.
And CR, building on that, thinking about how you design your benefit offerings in terms of inclusion, right? So including offerings that are designed to attract and retain and support different communities. So that can really be inclusive of all different types of needs and people, and communicating those in multiple different ways, because not everyone ingests information in the same way. So some people may need short videos, some people may need text, some people may need visuals. So you really want to have a lot of different types of communication to be able to address different styles of learning and education, because that will be important. And also addressing the fact that it's about, in the benefits world in particular, not just the employee, but also their dependents, their family members who will be part of that and who will be partaking in those benefits in particular. So you want to really, really, as you know, the consumers need to be able to be part of it, communicate those things to them and offer them the ability to communicate, you know, to absorb that information in multiple ways and receive it in multiple ways, so that they are able to partake of the offerings that you're giving them as an employer.
Mm. Where do we go next? Sandy, would you like to go? And then we wrap up with Alisa, if that's okay.
No problem. I think, Brian really touched on it, making sure that you are taking kind of those special, unique aspects of that individual and allowing them to utilize those and blossom in them, the same way that we want to make sure that the areas that they're not as strong, that we don't penalize them for not being strong in those areas or it being out of their comfort zone. And I think allowing them to be able to just show up as they are, and being able to have that safe space, right? Because that's one very big thing, right? I know, like, for example, like my kiddo, he doesn't like to be hugged. He wants the hugs when he wants the hugs, right? So and that's how I tend to, a lot of my stories, I utilize those same analogies because of the fact that it makes it easier for sometimes for people to understand in the workplace, like the managers, well, they're like completely, right in my space and I just need to. And so it's just kind of, allowing them and sharing with them and saying like, okay, we'll see my kiddo, I say, can I hug you? And I go like this. I don't hug. I just say, can I hug you? And if he says no, or if he goes, then I know that it's not the time. And then he'll just come when he's ready, right? So I think it's just us making a very, very safe place for those individuals, like myself, to be able to come in and just be able to give the best part of us. So sometimes, and the understanding, because I think one of the difficulties when it comes down to people that have ADHD is that the task might be this small, and to everybody else the task is this small, but to us that task is going to take, because it's something that I'm maybe perhaps not as familiar or as comfortable, it's going to take 50% of my energy for the day to accomplish. Just that simple understanding that we don't look at it the same way, we don't look at it as a small task, that we look at it as how much out of me is it going to take for me to accomplish that task. So, and because once let's say, for example, that task takes us 50% of our energy for the day, we're not even going to be able to, be at our best, because of the fact that we've already put all of that into it, right? So we tend to avoid or leaving those items till the end when we are able to actually put all that energy into it. So I think just having that safe space, allowing that safe space to come with your skills that you are strong in and come with your skills that you are not strong in, and you're okay. We will help you with those skills, whether they're difficult for you or they're strong for you, but we're here to help. So I think that's key.
Thank you.
I love the diversity of perspectives here. This is just really, it's a wonderful conversation. And it reminds me of my younger son and one of his best friends. And so stories, Manola, this is very telling, I think, of everything everyone said, is that my son Ben is very emotional, very emotionally intelligent. Somewhat to even a fault, to be honest with you. Sometimes we have to remind him to take care of himself. And his best friend is on the spectrum, very process-oriented, engineering, math, all the things that Brian described before. And I asked Ben one time, it's an interesting combination. Like, why do you choose to be friends? Like, why are you such great friends? And Ben said that his friend, I'm going to leave the friend nameless for now, said that because Ben's really teaching him how to read and understand other people's needs. And Ben said his friend teaches him how to be a little less emotional, a little bit more processing oriented. And this is what he said to me, and it knocked me off my block. He says, he always tells me the truth. And I thought, what a great thing, because he looked at this friend who may, to some people, lack filters, but to Ben, he was telling him like he said it, like he thought it. It wasn't all this social layering on it. And that was hugely valuable to Ben. Very, very important to Ben to have a sanity check in a lot of areas, particularly through school and high school and all. And, again, a superpower, I think so. I really think so. I think it's a way to utilize, and, I just recently had a functional MRI with all my entire family. And when we talked to the neuroscientists, where we're participating in some research, they said, genetically, environmentally, everyone's brains, we have different pathways based on our experiences and everything that we go through life. And I don't want to water down the neurodivergent definition so that we say everybody's neurodivergent. No, we're talking about, the fact that we all come with our skills and our talents. And I think no matter what, in the neurodivergent community, there's so much richness in the skills that they bring and the way that they look at the world, that we would be silly, maybe even stupid as managers, as leaders, not to bring them into the conversation, because otherwise people are going to tell you what you want to hear, not always the truth.
What I took from the undercurrent of our conversation so far is that harnessing the power of neurodiversity in the workplace is by no means an HR thing. So my next question comes with a bit of a twist. How can HR professionals make sure that the organizations and the people within organizations are meaningfully equipped to harness the power of neurodiversity in whatever role they interact with it, in whatever process context they interact with it? And I will just leave this question there, and I will ask you to pop into the conversation as inspiration strikes.
Yeah, I can kick us off. One of the things that I've learned in working in remote first organizations has been similar things of solutions that may seem to only fit for a neurodivergent person that also fit for a neurotypical person. So, for example, body doubling. I don't know about you, but sometimes working at home, you can start to get a little lonely or feel a bit isolated. And so I had a coworker with ADHD who's like, hey, why don't we just log on at the same time? We can do our individual work, but just knowing that there's someone else there, that space that you get typically when you're in a building together. And we can do that. That helps me. It stabilizes me when I just look up and see that you're there. that supports me. And that helped me not to feel as isolated, right? And I think some of the practices, getting that buy-in has to be like, this doesn't necessarily need to be hard. It's not difficult. You're not treating someone completely and separately different. We're taking in tactics that support them, but how can we distribute it throughout the entire organization? So I think it's about educating people around what some of those tactics can look like, and then training. I will say, to the rooftops, most managers come to me and ask for training. Like, people are like, no, no one wants to go to training. They're so busy. They're like, no, please, we need training, right? So if someone knows I can be a better manager, but by doing things that I encourage everyone to do, and it also is beneficial to this community, to this identity, right? It's a win on all fronts. So that's one example I can share.
Yeah, that's a great point, CR, about training. And I think a complement to that, for HR to really be an advocate, is to get educated themselves, ourselves, right? So your question, Manola, at the top, can you explain thoughtfully? Do you have an understanding of what the categories of neurodivergence are? It's not just being on the spectrum, right? It's dyslexia, dyspraxia, and other conditions. What about your processes? Have you audited them with a lens towards their accessibility? Are they open and inviting and inclusive of a candidate, for instance, who's neurodivergent? Have you gone through your job postings, right? Talked about captions before. Different side of the same coin is just the language that gets used. And I'm obviously, yes, language should be inclusive by nature, but most JDs are poorly written, hard stop. And if you have a talented neurodivergent candidate, if it's jargony, if it's run on, you're going to lose them before they can even enter in the process. So it's just knowing your shop and knowing where you can make tweaks, and then combining that with stepping outside and not just handing off knowledge of neurodivergence to an in-house expert, assuming that you even have one.
I think another area where, as employers, we can really think about just how we can support different ways of thinking and processing and working is providing tools that help people who think and process differently. It's simple, but it can really make a difference. So to the idea of captions, right? That is a tool, but there are other tools as well that help facilitate work for people who may not process things quite in the same way, and that can make their ability to do the work that they do much easier and much faster or more accurate, or name that adjective. But there's a lot of great software and things out there, depending on what you're looking to do, that can really facilitate that. And that's really not just for neurodivergent individuals, but in particular for specific neurodivergent needs, relatively low-hanging fruit in terms of accommodation that can make a huge difference. And you get the flip side of that in terms of the creativity and the diversity of thought that you can bring into the workplace from those individuals, that can make just such an amazing contribution that you wouldn't otherwise have.
So I mentioned before employee resource groups, or whatever label you have in your own organization. We have about 40 of them collected so far at the Alliance. And needless to say, even if you just to have a neurodivergent group, even if it's only 3 people, that makes a statement to the rest of the organization. But even if it does have 3 people, recognizing that there's a lot of people that probably want to participate, again, not by showing up at an event or even a Zoom kind of a virtual event, but by consuming information, by understanding what tools are available. There are lots of ways to provide information that, again, don't have to involve people being in uncomfortable, unconfident situations, right? So again, I would encourage anyone that doesn't have a neurodivergent ERG, that's a mouthful, to consider putting one together, just like you might have other groups. And again, looking at it and measuring it, operating it perhaps a little bit differently. Again, watching the metrics for success and the way it operates is going to be different than, say, for the women's group. But needless to say, I think it puts a statement in the ground for the rest of the organization that you value and want to support those people who need it.
Thank you. Sandy.
So I think, pretty much we've touched on every aspect of it. Education is super key, right? Sharing with our managers, sharing resources. And I think one big, huge one would be teaming up with your broker, because they're able to actually provide additional resources. You can do lunch and learns. You can do things of that nature that would actually help share the education, share that aspect of it. A lot of our brokers or insurance or carriers, right, do have those lunch and learns, do have that material. Therefore, just grabbing the newsletter that they're sharing regarding that. I know they'll have like, one regarding autism when we have, awareness month, right? And so I think if you actually just take the time to team up with your benefits providers, that's a start, because you're sharing that information. You're not just giving it to your managers and your supervisors. You're also sharing it with the staff. So depending on what kind of platform you have, right? And what I mean by platform is, let's say, for example, your HRIS system. So in some of them, you can actually send out an email, and it sends them to each individual employee. So with that said, we can actually share, hey, here's a newsletter for this month. FYI, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate, come and ask, right? And I think that's a good way to start the education process. That just doesn't cover the top, but trickles all the way down. When you have your open enrollment meetings, when you have your onboarding meetings regarding benefits, making sure that your actual benefits provider, if they're the ones doing the presentation or you're doing the presentation, that they are actually sharing about these particular topics. Because 99.9% of the time, that isn't the case. We're not sharing it. We're not saying, hey, by the way, we've noticed that this is going on more now in the, not just in the workplace, but at home. We went from, having 1 out of 36 kids being autistic, and depending on your country, because I know in other countries it's a lot less, but, just being able to say, hey, I know this is happening out there. Here are some resources in case you are one of those and you're not ready to come forth, because like we said, you're a new hire. You're not always comfortable to say, hey, this is going to be potentially an issue that I'm going to be having, whether it's because of my attendance or whatever the case might be. They're not ready to share. They're not ready to open up. But if we are allowing that space for them to start opening up, open it for dialogue, I think that's a great start.
Yeah, and if I can build off of what Sandy said, someone in the comments asked, where can I find good training materials for managers in HR? Definitely what Sandy is saying. The benefits programs you already have, go out to those vendors. The benefit brokers you already have, go out to those people and ask them to bring in the resources. They have the tools. they're supporting this ecosystem in general, right? So that's a great first source of truth. I'll also share that I've been attending the Microsoft Ability Summit for a couple of years. It's a free 1-day summit that they have every March. I actually just went to the site just to make sure it was still up there. You can register and review and replay some of the videos. They have amazing resources around their disability ERG. That's actually one of the largest and oldest in the country, right? So getting best practices from there. Alyssa is a great resource as well. The ERG Alliance is an amazing resource, and you can actually contribute ideas on Microsoft. So if you are in a Microsoft ecosystem at your workplace, or I'm pretty sure even on Google Suite, contribute those ideas. Like, hey, this tool doesn't work. Great. Let them roll out those things, right? We don't have to make this hard. We don't have to make this expensive. When we think about universal design, let's make it better for everyone. And even those who don't need it benefit.
Mm. Thank you all. And also a big request for help from everybody in the audience. If you know of sources of good materials, and I was just sitting here thinking that I have a feeling that the conversations around neurodiversity are also quite cultural sensitive. So if people from around the world, they know sources that are particularly relevant and meaningful to their immediate environments, please also share those in the comments. Now, I was thinking how to best use the last minute, and we're about 5-6 minutes away from saying goodbye. And I would invite each of you, can you share a practice that you found particularly helpful in harnessing the power of neurodiversity? It can be a team practice, it can be a recruitment practice, it can be a practice from other areas that come to mind, something that is actionable and people in the audience can take with them and implement. And in the interest of time, I will do the e-mic journey again. So I will ask Cassandra to go first on this last round of answers.
Thank you, Manola. I think one of the things is making sure that you have the ability to moderate the sensory input in any environment. When you have neurodivergence, it is also affected by a lot of sensory sensitivity, and that can impact quite a bit sort of how someone is able to tolerate their environment. So sensory modulation in the environment is definitely a low-hanging fruit item.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. Brian.
Yeah, best practice. Make sure that your upfront candidate assessments are neurodivergent friendly. Typically including a timer. We talked about captions, having color contrast optionality. Is a mouse necessary? Is audio necessary? These are things that can be built in, and if they can't be added to your current platform, if you're out there looking for a new stack, these are points that you absolutely should put upfront with any conversation with the vendor, even in an RFP. Make sure that they have the capability to address universal design, like CR was saying, that it's WCAG compliant. I think the latest version, Web Access Guidelines, latest version of 3.0 is coming out soon. So I'm looking at it from the standpoint of being able to identify and capture this talent up front.
Thank you so much, Brian. CR.
Yeah, I would say start from the beginning. Make sure that you're even compliant with the laws, right? Like sometimes we're over here trying to find the best solution and we're doing a disservice to the people who haven't been accommodated. Roll something out in your open enrollment communications this year. I love what you said, Sandy. Like, hey, do you need a workplace accommodation? This is what workplace accommodations can look like. Because people don't even know. They might be like, I think so. Should I? If you're interested, please contact, right? Make it super easy and part of a communication so it doesn't seem like this one random thing. Again, this isolation piece. We're including you when we're thinking about wellness and well being. Hey, is the event during the workday? Is it after work? The place that we're going to after work, does it have the accommodations for that person? Right? So let's try to do things in places that make the most sense. I think if you always have that lens, like Brian said, I love that word, having that lens around that inclusion aspect and then making it so that way it's part and parcel of the things that you already do, that to me is already making a very high impact statement.
Thank you, CR. Alisa.
The simplest thing we can do is just thank somebody for bringing it to your attention. Thank them for contributing in the meeting when you realize that that may be in a tough situation. You know, hey, I know how hard that was for you. That was a really great comment. And we really appreciate your contribution. Just putting out a little confidence to those people who need it. And speaking of which, Manala, you are a phenomenal, and I'm saying it in public, phenomenal moderator. I know you've been having a hard day, and let me tell you, nobody would know it. So thank you for all the great questions in the organization here.
Thank you. Sandy.
What I would add, just like I was saying before, is making it a safe place. That's one of the big practices for me. I would say make it a safe place, make it to where you also share your experiences. And because of the fact that I think that that helps, it opens it up to making sure that they know that they can come to you. And just like I had said before, teaming up with your benefits providers is huge. Making sure that you have, a topic every month that you can share with your staff, right? Because it's not just autism, it's not just ADHD, it's not just, there's many different types of, neurodiversity, as well as different types of accommodations that could be needed, or or could be low-hanging fruit, like Cassandra was mentioning, right? That could be very minimal. And so we don't know what we don't know, and the same way they don't know what they don't know. So just open it up for dialogue.
Thank you all so very much. And Cassandra, Brian, CR, Alisa, and Sandy, it was a joy. This conversation felt like a gift. I am sure that for many people in the audience, it felt not only inspiring, but also validating and quite possibly healing as well. To me personally, it felt like a big hug in more ways than one. So I am profoundly grateful. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for being here. And please do keep this conversation alive. Take it with you, around you, in your workplace, in your life, and you will touch lives that you can't even imagine. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jessa. Thank you, Enrique, for creating the space for this. And I hope I will get to welcome as many of you as possible in many future conversations. Thank you.